Hi, I'm Kate Middleton. When I was growing up, my parents always taught me that real success comes from staying humble and working smart. While other kids talked about becoming doctors or lawyers, I found myself fascinated by something very different, the stock market. By the time I was 13, I was reading every investment book I could get my hands on and spending hours tracking market trends. My parents thought it was a bit strange. My mom would sometimes watch me surrounded by financial reports and say, "Sweetie, maybe you should spend more time with your friends." But I would smile and reply, "This is fun for me, Mom." Did you know Brandon Sklenar bought his first stock when he was 12? She would laugh and shake her head, saying, "Just promise me you won't forget to live your life while you're planning your empire." That promise became harder to keep as my interest in investing grew into a deep passion. By the time I was 17, I had already started managing my own small portfolio using my savings and allowance. I loved the challenge of making my money grow. Getting a full scholarship to study finance at Brown felt like the natural next step in my journey. At Brown, I met Jeremy. He was studying business administration and had big dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. We met during finals week when we both reached for the same economics textbook in the library. "Ladies first," he said with a charming smile. I laughed and said, "Thanks. I'm Kate." He replied, "I'm Jeremy. Maybe we can study together." That's how it all started. What began as a simple study session turned into daily coffee dates, and eventually we started dating. Unlike other people I had met, Jeremy didn't think my ambition was weird or intimidating. In fact, he admired it. He would watch me analyze market trends and say, "You're going to dominate the business world. Any company would be lucky to have you." What he didn't know was that I had no plans to work for anyone else. Thanks to my scholarship covering all my expenses, I used most of my money to grow my investment portfolio. By the time I graduated, my portfolio had grown significantly. But I didn't talk about it much. I didn't want people to see me as just some girl with a trust fund. I wanted to succeed on my own terms. Jeremy got a prestigious job at Sterling Industries, a big tech company in Jacksonville. He was excited about climbing the corporate ladder, but I had a different path in mind. I decided to work independently, focusing on my investments and building my own financial future. It wasn't the usual route, but it was the one that felt right for me. Looking back, I'm proud of the choices I made. They were never the easiest, but they were mine. When I turned down several big job offers, Jeremy was surprised. "Are you sure?" he asked. "These are amazing opportunities." "I have my own plans," I said with a smile. "Trust me." A year later, we got married in a small and simple ceremony. Jeremy's mother, Ashley, wasn't very happy about my career choice. "Investment consulting?" she would say with a skeptical look. "Is that even a real job?" I just smiled, remembering how my parents had taught me to stay humble and not worry about what others thought. By that time, my portfolio was worth over $90 million. It was carefully spread out across different investments, quietly making me one of the largest individual shareholders in Jeremy's company, Sterling Industries. But no one, not even Jeremy, knew about it. Jeremy was doing great at Sterling. He was moving up the ranks and eventually started working directly under Andrew Garfield, the company's vice president of operations. Garfield was known for his old-fashioned and often rude opinions, especially about women. "The problem with modern marriages," he would say at company events, "is that women forget their place." Jeremy would laugh nervously whenever Garfield made such remarks, trying to avoid conflict. It annoyed me, but I stayed quiet. That is, until the annual executive party came around. Sterling was about to announce its restructuring plans, and as a major shareholder, I decided to attend. "Are you sure you want to come?" Jeremy asked. "These events can be boring if you're not part of the company." "I think it's time I took a closer look at your work," I replied, carefully applying my makeup. I chose a classic black dress, pearl earrings, and my grandmother's vintage watch, a special piece I wore whenever I faced important moments. When we arrived at the hotel ballroom, the place was buzzing with conversations. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and the faint scent of champagne filled the air. Jeremy guided me toward Andrew Garfield, who was surrounded by a group near the bar.
"Kate."
"Jeremy," Andrew called out, raising his glass. We were just talking about Sterling's exciting new plans, cutting research and development for quick profits. I asked, pretending to be curious. Doesn't innovation lead to long-term success? Andrew's smile faded for a moment. The little wife has opinions on business, does she? He said mockingly, and the group around him laughed. Jeremy shifted uncomfortably and tried to brush it off. She likes to read the financial news, he said. Honey, maybe we should get some drinks. But Andrew wasn't finished. He raised his voice. Sterling's biggest problem, he announced, is too many voices from people who don't understand real business, like housewives who think reading the Wall Street Journal makes them experts. The crowd chuckled, but I noticed the company's CEO, David Harbour, watching the exchange closely. My husband, who once admired my intelligence, stared down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. It was a turning point I would never forget. I was about to respond when a familiar voice cut through the room. Actually, Andrew, you might want to rethink that, Isabel Allende said confidently. Isabel was my private banker, and someone I trusted completely. Her smile was sharp and full of purpose. Should I explain, Kate, or would you like to? She asked, glancing at me. Andrew's confident expression wavered. What is this? He asked, looking uneasy. I straightened up, feeling the comforting weight of my grandmother's vintage watch on my wrist. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Since you're so concerned about shareholder value, Andrew, I began, keeping my voice steady and calm, perhaps we should discuss the report I'll be presenting at Sunday's board meeting. It outlines why your restructuring plan is doomed to fail. Andrew's face turned bright red. Board meeting? What are you talking about? He stammered. Before I could answer, CEO David Harbour stepped forward. His expression was calm, but curious. Kate Middleton, he said slowly. HA Holdings. I knew that name sounded familiar. I smiled. Surprise, I said lightly. Staying anonymous can be a very effective strategy. Jeremy, who had been silent this whole time, whispered, What's going on? His face was pale, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. Isabel stepped forward, her voice cutting through the growing murmurs in the room. Your wife, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, owns 65% of Sterling Industries shares. And no, she doesn't spend her days shopping. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then chaos erupted. People started whispering, glancing at me with wide eyes. Andrew Garfield's face cycled through shades of red I didn't even know were possible. Jeremy looked like he might faint. CEO Harbour raised a hand to stop her. That won't be necessary, Isabel, he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. I suspected this for some time. The board has been impressed with Mrs. Middleton's insights and recommendations for years. Andrew turned to Harbour, stunned. You knew? Of course, Harbour replied smoothly. Why do you think your restructuring plan hasn't been approved? Mrs. Middleton raised significant objections. Jeremy finally found his voice, though it was shaky. Kate, how? When? He stared at me, his wide eyes full of confusion. I met his gaze calmly and said, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. The moment was overwhelming, but I felt a sense of clarity. This was not just about proving a point, it was about taking control of my own narrative and reminding people that quiet strength often speaks the loudest. I think we should continue this conversation in private, I suggested, noticing the growing crowd of curious onlookers. My office is just upstairs, Harbour offered. Shall we? The elevator ride was uncomfortably silent. Jeremy kept looking at me, then at the floor, while Andrew fumed quietly. Isabel, ever composed, stood calmly by my side, her presence a steady source of support. When we entered Harbour's office, its grandeur was striking. The panoramic views of the Jacksonville skyline stretched out before us, the city lights sparkling like stars. Harbour gestured for us to sit. Andrew quickly grabbed the chair closest to Harbour's desk, as if sitting near him could somehow restore his authority. Well, Harbour said, leaning back in his chair. This has certainly been an eventful evening. Eventfuls? Andrew exploded. This is outrageous. She can't possibly. She can and she does, Isabel interrupted firmly, placing a stack of documents on the desk. Kate Middleton, through carefully managed investment vehicles, owns 65% of Sterling Industries. She has been building her position for the past 6 years. Jeremy's face shifted from confusion to hurt. 6 years? But we've only been married for 4. I started investing in Sterling before we met, I explained evenly. I saw potential in the company but also recognized it needed modernization. It was an opportunity one couldn't ignore. Modernization? Andrew sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Yes, Andrew, I replied calmly. Modernization, like fostering innovation instead of cutting research and development. Like respecting employees rather than encouraging a toxic workplace. Harper leaned forward, nodding. Mrs. Middleton's recommendations have been crucial to our strategy. Her analysis consistently outperforms expectations. Jeremy's voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? I met his gaze steadily. Would it have made a difference? Would you have defended me against Andrew's comments if you'd known I was Sterling's majority shareholders? Jeremy flinched, the answer clear in his silence. This is absurd. Andrew barked, rising from his chair. I've dedicated 16 years to Sterling. You can't just take over and… Andrew, I interrupted firmly, your restructuring plan would destroy this company. The board has already decided not to support it. Harper cut in, his tone serious. In fact, we need to discuss your future with Sterling. My future? Andrew looked shocked, his face pale. Yes, Harper replied firmly. Your behavior and outdated mindset have hurt this company. It's time for a change. Andrew's bluster faded as the reality of the situation set in. Jeremy sat frozen, still processing everything. I glanced at Isabel, her calm and steady presence reassuring. For years, I had worked quietly building something meaningful. Now, the truth was out. It was time for Sterling Industries to embrace a future of innovation and respect, something Andrew could no longer stand in the way of. I stood up and met Andrew's furious glare. Your leadership is outdated. Your strategies are short-sighted. And your behavior is completely unacceptable. Sterling deserves better. You can't fire me, Andrew shouted, his face red with anger. You're just a majority shareholder. Isabel, calm and composed as ever, stepped in. Actually, yes, she can, she said firmly. Jeremy stayed frozen in place, his expression unreadable. Finally, he murmured, you told me you were consulting. You said it was small scale. I never lied, I said softly. I just didn't tell you everything. Would you have respected my decisions if I had? Before Jeremy could respond, Andrew erupted again, pointing angrily at him. She's tearing us apart. Women like her. That's enough, Harper snapped, his voice sharp and commanding. Andrew, you'll receive the details of your separation package tomorrow. Please leave. Andrew stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent. Isabel gave me a small nod and excused herself, leaving me alone with Jeremy and Harper. Mrs. Middleton, Harper began, breaking the quiet. Will you be taking a more active role in the company? Yes, I replied without hesitation. Starting with a full review of our culture and leadership, Jeremy finally spoke, his voice unsteady. And what about us? He asked. I turned to him, my tone steady but firm. That depends. Are you ready to see me as your equal? Or am I still just the little wife you wanted to stay quiet at company events? Jeremy's face crumbled as he tried to respond. I need time, he stammered before standing abruptly. This is all too much. He left and I watched him walk away. Harper cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Family and business rarely mix well, he said thoughtfully. True, I agreed, letting out a deep breath. But principles should never be compromised. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News of Andrew's firing made headlines, Sterling Industries, shake up at the top. The company's stock price dipped briefly, but soon recovered as my plans for the company became public. Jeremy stayed with his parents, trying to process everything. His mother left me a string of angry voicemails, but I deleted them without hesitation. My focus remained on Sterling and the changes it needed. I revitalized research and development, introduced work-life balance policies, and prioritized fostering innovation. Slowly but surely, the company began to transform. A week later, Jeremy returned. He looked exhausted, his usual polished appearance replaced by a worn, tired look. Hesitating at the door, he finally spoke. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. It was the first step toward a conversation I knew we both needed, one that would determine the future of not just our marriage, but the way we saw and respected each other. I gestured toward the chair across from my desk. Jeremy sat for a moment, but then stood again, pacing nervously back and forth. "I've been thinking about everything," he began. "About us, about work." And I prompted, keeping my voice calm. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I let Andrew and others disrespect you. I should have stood up for you. But instead, I stayed silent. I was so focused on my career that I lost sight of what really matters." I watched him closely for a moment before responding. "Jeremy, change doesn't happen through words alone. It happens through actions. Are you ready to show me that you see me as your equal?" He nodded, and I saw a flicker of determination in his eyes. "Yes, I am." I waited silently, giving him the space to continue. "But you weren't completely honest with me either," he said after a pause. "You kept such a big part of your life hidden. How can we have a real marriage with secrets like that?" "You're right," I admitted, keeping my voice steady. "I should have trusted you with the truth. But Jeremy, ask yourself, why didn't I feel like I could?" He sank back into the chair, running his hands through his hair. "Because I showed you I couldn't be trusted. Every time I laughed at Andrew's jokes, every time I told you to stay quiet, I proved I cared more about office politics than supporting my wife. The weeks that followed tested everything: my marriage, my strength, and my ability to lead Sterling Industries through massive changes." Andrew Garfield didn't go quietly. He hired a lawyer and threatened to sue for wrongful termination. Meanwhile, his allies in the company whispered behind my back. "She's tearing down our traditions," they muttered in the break room. This is what happens when emotions run a business. But facts don't lie. Within a month, employee satisfaction had soared by 50%, and the research and development team, finally free from Andrew's stifling influence, filed 15 new patent applications. The stock price climbed steadily, proving that my decisions weren't just bold, but necessary. At home, Jeremy seemed caught in a strange limbo. He slept in the guest room and tiptoed around me, unsure of where we stood. His mother, Ashley, however, had no hesitation. One afternoon, she stormed into our house unannounced, her designer heels clicking loudly on the floor. "We need to talk," she declared, barely waiting before stepping into the living room. "By all means," I replied drily, closing the door behind her. "This power trip of yours has gone far enough," she said, crossing her arms. "You've made your point. Now step back and let the men handle the business." Her words hung in the air, sharp and condescending. I stayed calm, but I knew this conversation would be another battle I'd have to face head-on. I raised an eyebrow. "The men? You mean the ones who humiliated me? You've embarrassed Jeremy enough already." Ashley snapped. "His colleagues don't know how to treat him anymore. Do you have any idea what this is doing to his career?" "Humiliated," I repeated, my tone calm but firm. "You mean like how I was humiliated at business events? Laughed at? Dismissed as just a housewife?" "That's different," Ashley said, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "That's just how business works." "Is it?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Men need to undermine women to boost their egos? Pretend women aren't capable if they show competence? That's what you're defending." "You tricked him," she burst out, her voice rising. "My son married you thinking you were a normal wife. And now look at this mess. What is he supposed to do now?" Before I could respond, Jeremy's voice cut through the tension. "Enough," he said firmly, startling both of us. Ashley turned to him, relief spreading across her face. "Jeremy, thank goodness you're here. We need to talk sense into her before she ruins everything." But Jeremy wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something new: understanding. "Mom," he said evenly. You need to leave.
What? But.
Now, he repeated firmly. Ashley's face flushed, but she didn't argue further. She turned on her heel and left, her heels clicking loudly as she walked out. The house fell silent. Jeremy sank onto the couch, looking completely drained. I heard everything, he said quietly. And I finally get it. I've been just like her, treating you like someone I had to manage, not support. And I'm sorry. I sat down beside him, but kept a little distance. I didn't want to outshine you, Jeremy, I said softly. I just wanted your respect. As your wife. As a partner. As a person. You have it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve your trust right now, but I want to earn it. Not because of your money or your power, but because I love you, and I want to be the partner you deserve. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was Isabel. Kate, she said when I answered. Andrew has withdrawn his lawsuit. Word about Sterling's latest quarterly projections has spread, and they're impressive. Send me the details, I said, smiling. And Isabel, thank you for everything. After I hung up, Jeremy looked at me. Good news? Andrew is backing down, I replied with a small smile. Jeremy nodded, relief crossing his face. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope for Sterling, for my marriage, and for the respect we were finally starting to build between us. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. I nodded. It seems like success really is the best revenge. Jeremy looked thoughtful. What happens now? With Sterling? And with us? Sterling will keep changing, I said confidently. We're rolling out a new parental leave policy and launching a mentorship program for women in tech next month. And us? He asked, his voice unsure. I took a deep breath before answering. That depends. Are you ready for a marriage of equals? Truly ready. Jeremy hesitated, then smiled slightly. I'd like to try, he said. Starting with moving out of the guest room, if you're okay with that. Sleeping there is killing my back. I laughed, surprising myself. We'll need couples counseling, I said. And you'll have to stand up to your mother. Done, he said, grinning. Though maybe we should have dinner with her next week. I'd love to see her reaction when you explain your new women's leadership initiative. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of real hope for us. Things wouldn't be easy, but at least we were moving forward together. Jeremy was trying, and so was I. That small step felt like the start of something better, for Sterling, for our marriage, and for the respect we were learning to give each other.